He's the founder of and the singer-songwriter of the Dead Kennedys. The Dead Kennedys album Frankenchrist was the first album in the United States to go on trial for obscenity. He was also the New York State Green Party presidential nominee. Ladies and gentlemen, Jello Biafra.
Which one? Oh, that one works better. Okay. Put this one back over here, I guess. Who was Saint Olaf, by the way? Did he invent Wonder Bread or something? Or, the saint of cross-country skiing? Or the one who blessed you with those golf trophies out there or something? I don't know. Anyway, I've changed my topic for Spitfire due to change in world events, so it's time to talk about the big bad elephant in the room. And I don't like Osama bin Laden or Islamic fundamentalism, especially what they do to women, either. And I want to be safe from terrorism and violence too, but I get equally frightened when George Bush says things like, "You're either with us or with the terrorists." Some choice. Which means that now, of all times, the time not to be afraid to stand up and say, "Yo, we are not with Bush or the terrorists." And especially now that our drug-running buddies, the Northern Alliance, are summarily executing prisoners and running amok in Kabul after we asked them not to invade the place. High time to ask again, is what we're doing over there really the best way to solve this problem? Or will the short-term orgy of violence bring much bigger problems down the road? I fear a mass slaughter much bigger than what went down at the World Trade Center and the bombing of the Pentagon, in the process planting the seeds, just like we did in the Gulf War, to create more and more and more terrorists. And even if we do manage to wipe out Osama bin Laden and kill all of his followers, what will their kids be like? What will their kids be like? The frightening thing is that Osama bin Laden does speak for millions of more people. And he's dead right, no pun intended, when he says, "You kill me, there's going to be 100 more in my place." I fear it may be more like 100,000 in his place. In 1991, Jimmy Carter warned the first George Bush that his Gulf War would set peace and Middle Eastern relations back at least 20 years. Now what happens? Now what do we do? The hype of the past few days have been, oh, we're kicking the Taliban's ass, they're running for cover, they're crawling back in their holes, they're trying to blend into the population, blend into the local population, even if it means shaving off their precious ZZ Top beards or whatever. But we are still playing with fire over there. And I'm not the least bit comfortable seeing the clown prince of the oil barons, George W. Bush, the one who came right out and said during his acceptance speech to the Republican convention on national TV, "Don't mess with Texas." And later, during one of the debates, showed his brain cell level and wisdom when he said things like, "We have to quit talking about Social Security like it's some kind of fatal program," which of course it is. such an ass of himself, he thought the Taliban was a rock band. This is who's in charge. And here he is with cans of gasoline spilled all around him and nothing but a pack of matches and people encouraging him to light it. I mean, I know we're all supposed to follow the advice of Al Gore and Joseph Lieberman like little puppy dogs and get behind Bush because he's our president, but I just don't have any confidence in the man to show any wisdom and do the right thing long term in this situation. I can't shake this vision of him that's kept me awake at night, of King George II running around the room during the War Council meetings or at Camp David, you know, with his shirt pulled up just like Beavis in the cartoon. I'm the great Cornholio! I'm the great Cornholio! And Cheney or Colin Powell picking him up by the scuff of the neck and plopping him back in the chair. Sit still, George. We have a war to plan. We have people to annihilate. We have countries to destroy. Then can we watch some baseball? I mean, for the most part, since September 11th, I've been out of the country on a European tour, and that means I've been exposed to much higher quality news media than we get over here. I couldn't read the Dutch papers or the German papers because of a language barrier, but was told they were pretty good. But even the more mainstream or conservative British papers, and not the Sun with the page 3 girls and headlines like Queen has rubber duck in her bath, which I really did see when I was over there. But some of the others like The Guardian out of Manchester, boy, somebody even recognized it. Maybe you can remember their website better than I can. I can't remember the name of it. The Independent is pretty good too, and they've had all kinds of interesting stuff over there that I found out to my horror we aren't getting over here. They've gone into a lot more depth on the history of the conflict. For example, that we started funding Mujahideen guerrillas 6 months before the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in hopes that they would invade so we could draw them into a Vietnam-style quagmire, which we did. And we'll get to a little more, and that a lot of them were trained by Pakistan's ISI intelligence agency, CIA. And within a couple years of those two agencies being involved, Afghanistan was the #1 heroin producer in the world. And the United Nations just released a report saying that half the heroin coming out of Afghanistan today was coming out of the 10% of the territory that was then controlled by the Northern Alliance. Yeah. And considering the Northern Alliance's track record before, where they fought so much among themselves over Kabul that it leveled a third of the city and killed 50,000 people the last time. It was stunts like that that made the Taliban look pretty good after a while, and how they got in the first place. Here we go again. There was also a report that there was a low-level diplomatic gathering informally in a hotel room in Berlin last July. United States was there, Russia was there, Iran was there, Pakistan was there, Northern Alliance was there, Taliban invited but did not attend, and the American diplomat just came right out and said, we're getting ready to invade Afghanistan and take out Osama bin Laden, and we don't care if you, Mr. Pakistan representative, take that information back to the Taliban, which he reportedly did, according to The Guardian. I thought that was pretty interesting information. I also thought it was pretty interesting information that they caught James Woolsey, Clinton's first CIA director, in London trying to dig up dirt on Saddam Hussein so he could pinning him, so he could pin the World Trade Center bombings on him too, and grant Dick Cheney and the Undersecretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz and the other cowboys in the Bush administration their wish to achieve their publicly announced goal which apparently also didn't hit print over here, that they want to widen the war into an invasion of Iraq, Syria, and Libya. Then what happens? Then what happens? It was also reported over there that Prime Minister Tony Blair, the second most enthusiastic warmonger in this twat, as Ingrid so rightly calls it, the war against terrorism, twat, I gotta remember that one. You know, and in terms of, you know, turning the twatoid amps up to 11, I mean, Bush and Blair are the main ones. Blair thinking he's Winston Churchill and Bush thinking he's John Wayne. But even, and I use the term thinking loosely when it comes to our current chief executive. Anyway, Blair did come out and say that he would pull Britain out of the alliance if we went into Iraq. So we at least should thank him for that one. And if you know anybody overseas, email them, write them, call them, encouraging them to keep the anti-war pressure up in those other countries in the alliance to make sure that they keep the pressure on Bush not to start widening this war into other countries if Donald Rumsfeld or the arms manufacturers get bored after a while. But the scariest thing that they were illuminating over there that has been discussed a little bit over here, but not in the detail that it should be, is the playing with fire. What about all the other countries with Islamic uprisings going on right now? Chief amongst them, Pakistan, where the military dictator General Pervez Musharraf has only been in power a couple years after a coup. And he must be frightened out of his wits right now. There's guns in both sides of his head. On one side, you've got a gun in his head saying, "You're with us or you're with the terrorists. Don't mess with Texas." And on the other side of his head, there's another gun getting pushed in there from his own people. 15% are estimated to be pro-Taliban. Not just pro-Afghan Taliban, but in favor of the growing Taliban movement in Pakistan. Taliban sympathizers are estimated to be 30% of the Pakistani armed forces, including many top-level generals. Hey, they knocked off somebody else and put Musharraf in power. They can just as easily get rid of him, too. Then what happens? If we wind up with that kind of a government in a country of 140 million people who for the most part already hate our guts, and they have the atomic bomb. This is the kind of fire we are playing over there. Not to mention, you remember the domino theory they talked about in Vietnam and whatnot. Well, look at the dominoes surrounding Afghanistan. Iran, well, we helped create the situation there, too. I'll get to that in a second. And then, but they're not going to help us for some strange reason. And then on the northern borders of Afghanistan, what do we have but former Soviet republics who are just still getting used to the idea of being an independent country at all, and they have strong Islamic fundamentalist insurrection movements going there, too. In Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, what's the other one? Uzbekistan that borders Afghanistan, and just north of there is Kazakhstan, who is now estimated to have more oil than Saudi Arabia, and who knows what we're going to do to protect that in order to run off of that country's natural resources. Although the people who say this whole war is so we can pipe the Kazakhstani oil down to the Persian Gulf need to look at a topographical map first. That theory doesn't fly. Meanwhile, after those former Soviet republics, you've got China, and in the Chinese province bordering Afghanistan, they too have a violent Islamic fundamentalist problem. And then, of course, you've got Pakistan. On top of that, the Gulf War already fanned the fires of Islamic fundamentalist movements all over the world, especially because we're still killing more Iraqi children every week through cutting off their access to food and medicine than the total of the people who died at the World Trade Center. fundamentalist movements of the violent species are already underway with help from Al-Qaeda, supposedly, but they may not need it if we get too carried away in Afghanistan. They range all the way from 2 different parts of Indonesia on fire now, Mindanao Island, the second biggest in the Philippines, strong Islamic fundamentalist movement there that they've been trying to wipe out for almost 40 years with no success, stretching all the way across to Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia itself, all the way across to Algeria. That is the amount of fire we are playing with here. And so George Bush's solution is, and this is another one of his intellectual giant quotes here, the only way to pursue peace is to pursue those who threaten it. What about negotiations? Is that too many syllables for the man, or what? What about listening to why the other side feels the way they do in the first place? Or even listening to our own government agencies trying to tell this guy what's going on. January 2001, one of our government agencies had this to say about the future faced by the incoming president. Thanks to further economic globalization, quote, regions, countries, and groups feeling left behind will face deepening economic stagnation, political instability, and cultural alienation. They will foster political, ethnic, ideological, and religious extremism, along with the violence that often accompanies it. Guess who said that? The CIA. They already knew. And so we keep stoking these fires over there. This is giving bin Laden exactly what he's hoping for. World War III, Islamic Jihad versus the West. Islam versus the West, which of course would also come in handy for Christian fundamentalists such as George Bush, Dick Cheney, and John Ashcroft, who would dearly love, I have a feeling, to keep this current state of emergency, clamping down on our civil rights through anti-terrorism legislation, not to mention keeping the arms manufacturers happy. Well, they're saying, oh, this war might take 5 years, 10 years, it might last a lifetime. What they forgot was the second part of their sentence, if we can scam well enough to get away with it. As the war bogs down and the instant results channel surfing Americans are used to don't come to pass, we have to keep people hyped up and scared shitless of terrorists with new ways. 2001, an anthrax odyssey. Never did I think that all I would have to do to be entertained would be to walk into a supermarket and look at bags of flour and baking soda and start laughing. You know what I'm gonna do to you? I'm gonna send you an envelope of gold medal Wondra. Ooh. Now, of all times, is to keep those bullshit detectors on high and beware media manufactured hysteria and at times outright lies and false images. I mean, we get a different story every day as to what's really going on in Afghanistan. Which ones are true? Does anybody know? Either they're going overboard to confuse the enemy or they have no idea what the hell to do over there. I haven't decided yet. Maybe they haven't either. False images. There's been widespread allegations that those dancing Palestinians celebrating in the streets after the World Trade Center went down was actually footage CNN dug up from 1991. And there have been other allegations that know that in fact was real, although other people, I haven't measured the time zones and the hours myself, claiming that it would have been pitch dark over there at the time they were shown dancing in the sun. I don't know, there's one. But we've let ourselves be drawn into wars before by false media images. Spanish-American War in the first part of the 20th century started after a ship of ours, the Maine, blew up in a harbor in Cuba. Remember the Maine! Remember the Maine! Cried William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper bearer the Citizen Kane movie was based on, in particular. Some history books even now call it Hearst's War. To this day, nobody has been able to prove one way or the other whether the Maine was blown up because of sabotage or an accidental boiler explosion. More recently, there were horror stories pouring out of Kuwait after the Iraqi army of Saddam Hussein invaded. And they said that those savage soldiers were storming into hospitals, dumping premature infants out of incubators and leaving them to die on the floor as they ran off with the medical equipment. And then a young Kuwaiti woman testified before Congress that, oh, there's all these horrible things going on, including the incubator story. You've got to help restore democracy to my country by installing the royal family, who has nothing good to say about democracy, back on the throne. It turned out that story was planted and the woman employed by the Hill and Knowlton Advertising Agency, who were hired by the Kuwaiti royal family to persuade the American people that they should go to war over in the Gulf just to put the royal family back on the throne. And it worked. Even worse, why do we go into Vietnam? Well, we had a few so-called advisors over there, just like we have in Colombia now, but the thing that got people all riled up was the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where if I recall, it was North Vietnamese gunboats allegedly firing on an American ship, and then Congress, just like now, passed a resolution near unanimously to give President Lyndon Johnson a blank check to do whatever he wanted over there. Net result was 50,000 Americans died, 1 million Vietnamese people died. They're still having deformed babies over there from all the Agent Orange we left behind. And it is now widely admitted, even in the corporate media, that the Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. Watch out for stuff like this. And I hope this doesn't turn out to be true, but a part of me would not be at all surprised if those envelopes of military-grade anthrax actually came from U.S. intelligence and Bush's cowboys trying to pin it on Saddam Hussein so we can widen the war. What I forgot to mention was that former CIA Director Woolsey, who was over in England trying to dig up information to link Saddam Hussein to the World Trade Center bombings, he did that at the behest of Undersecretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, one of the cowboy element, who, it appears, went behind Donald Rumsfeld and Bush's back to try and widen the war on his own. And just yesterday, Bush announced that he was going to have military tribunals to try suspected terrorists in secret. And this wouldn't just take place in Afghanistan, it could take place anywhere. Who is the suspected terrorist? There's one right over there. I have no idea if she's an American citizen or a British citizen. Any immigrant, even a legal immigrant, could be tried if the president suspects they might be a threat to national security. That scares me far more than Osama bin Laden does, to put it mildly. This cynical manipulation of our fear and justifiable emotional anguish and anger over the bombings in New York City and D.C. is cynical manipulation of fear to push the darker side of their own fascist agenda they know the American people don't support. Nobody is being more cynical about the whole situation to implement their agenda than the Bush administration. In a way I find downright unpatriotic. With these these new anti-terrorism laws, I fear a mass roundup of people who question any government's policies for any reason on the grounds that they're sympathizing with or aiding terrorism. And we've done this before, too. After World War I, thousands of immigrants and labor union activists were thrown in jail because they publicly opposed World War I. We've done this before. And we've already had both op-ed pieces in the Wall Street Journal and other corporate media publications, and the Prime Minister of Italy, among others, claiming that people who protest the World Trade Organization and corporate power, like was recently done in Geneva in Italy, that they too are terrorists. The guy in Italy was shot in the face and killed by the Italian police and then backed over by their truck on the grounds that he was a terrorist. Bill Maher, host of Politically Incorrect, bullied into apologizing for what I think was not just an innocent comment, but an accurate statement when he said that it was cowardly to blow up the World Trade Center with hijacked airplanes, and also cowardly to shell other countries with missiles fired from 2,000 miles away. His reward was to be bullied relentlessly. Sponsors pulling out of the program, stations canceling Politically Incorrect, and Bush's press secretary Ari Fleischer saying people have to watch what they do and watch what they say. Well, that's what I'm doing too. Ha ha ha. I'm proud to be an American. That's why I fight George Bush. On top of that, they're also now saying that even though so many of the American people oppose drilling for oil and wrecking the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, that Bush was afraid to introduce that bill in Congress and decided not to. Well, now they're saying, oh, well, I guess we're going to have to start drilling up there to fight terrorism, even though the oil was earlier earmarked for sale to China. And would only last us, what, a couple days overall? And, this one's even scarier. All of a sudden, well, looks like to fight terrorism, we're going to have to put all those nuclear satellites and nuclear missiles up in space. That wouldn't have done one damn bit of good to stop the bombing of the World Trade Center, the bombing of the Pentagon. But we'll put it up there anyway, not to protect us from terrorists, but to enrich arms manufacturers, whether or not that thing even works. And if it doesn't work, and comes back into the atmosphere, crashes like the Russian space station Mir just did, it'll melt in the atmosphere, get hotter as it re-enters, and blow. And if one of those nukes blows, there's going to be enough plutonium dust scattered throughout the world's atmosphere to potentially kill almost every living thing on Earth. I feel far more terrorized by that prospect than Osama and all his followers put together. And if NAFTA and the GATT treaty that gave us the WTO and all those laws they've been passing, signing over our sovereignty in writing to corporations, which as far as I'm concerned, Clinton shouldn't have been impeached for unauthorized weenie moistening, but by signing those laws, he should have been impeached for treason. Signing over our country's sovereignty to Wall Street, that is treason. And so, in the true spirit of hiding behind patriotism for treasonous acts, Bush is now trying to sneak through Congress a new law giving him fast-track authority, as they call it, to negotiate still worse trade agreements and not let anybody debate them anymore. Give them an hour more debate. Congress can't amend the treaty at all. It sails on through without anybody reading it, kind of like what happened with the new anti-terrorism laws. Fast-track legislation. If that comes up for a vote, call your Congress people. Email them, write them, crank phone calls as long as they're to the point. You get the drift. And Ashcroft and both King George I and King George II are saying we need to bring back the good old days when our intelligence agencies were allowed to do business with and skullduggery with what they define as unsavory characters. Bring back the good old days when we got in bed with the mob, we got in bed with narco-traffickers. You know, we need 1,000 more Oliver Norths to do that kind of dirty work, etc. Bring back the good old days of privatizing intelligence and not asking questions later if we ask questions at all. Well, unfortunately, a lot of these unsavory characters, a lot of the old Contragate criminals are now in the Bush administration. John Negroponte, ambassador to Honduras at the time, was widely believed to be the coordinator of the whole Contra War, which killed at least 30,000 people in Nicaragua, 6 times the amount who died in the World Trade Center. What do we do with him? Do we try him as a terrorist? Do we want him dead or alive? No, we make him ambassador to the United Nations. Yeah. Democrats helped vote him in, too, I might add. That's why I'm a member of the Green Party. Was getting in bed with these kind of unsavory characters just to play dirty chess games and try to be James Bond all over the world that got us into this problem in the first place. For example, in the early 1950s, the CIA arranged for the overthrow of the democratically elected government of Iran, led by Mohammad Mossadegh, and reinstall the Shah as our puppet dictator instead. He was so brutal toward his own people that he literally killed off all moderate opposition to his rule. So what was left when people were so fed up with him they weren't going to take it anymore no matter what? All they had left to turn to was fundamentalist Islamic extremists led by Ayatollah Khomeini. Out with the old dictator, in with the new dictator, as long as we get rid of the American puppet and his unsavory characters. As soon as Khomeini gets in, violent Islamic fundamentalist uprisings mushroom all over that part of the world. I can't help but wonder how much of this religious-based terrorist violence we would be dealing with today if we had left the Iranian people alone in the 1950s and let them elect their own government. I mean, in a rare moment of candor, even King George Bush I expressed no confidence in his own son, either the day of the bombings or the day after. They had him on TV. And is your son prepared for the task ahead? He smiled that icy reptilian grin of his. Well, I don't think anyone's prepared for something like this. But he has a great team behind him. He has a great team behind him. It's the team that worries me. Vice President Dick Cheney, who really runs the country, if not the war, was Secretary of Defense during King George I's Middle Eastern War, and at that time ordered then General Colin Powell to draw up plans to nuke Baghdad. And keep in mind, Bush and Cheney both weaseled out of being drafted and sent to Vietnam. And General Powell himself, as a young Army officer in Vietnam, helped cover up the My Lai massacre. And of course, Attorney General John Ashcroft is a notorious Bible-thumping fundamentalist Christian and not-so-closeted white supremacist who has prayer meetings in his office every day before work. And, oh yes. Oh, here's another example of our involvement with unsavory characters. As I said earlier, we helped finance and train the Mujahideen guerrillas who eventually did drag the Soviet Union into their own Vietnam and helped bring down their government and eventually drove them out. One of the young warriors we helped train and encourage was Osama bin Laden. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay, here, have a jihad. Go kill the Soviets. We won't even tell you it's really for Uncle Sam. Just go kill some people, okay? And then, once they've driven the Soviet army out, the Afghan people themselves and help rebuild their country? No. We didn't bother to finish the job. Okay, we're done with you. Chess game's over. Bye-bye. See ya. And these different groups of Mujahideen guerrillas began dividing up into their own warlords and began shooting at each other all over the country to the point where people were relieved when the Taliban got in, because at least all these other little civil wars could temporarily be stopped. No regard for the long-term consequences. In the Islamic world, this is called the Great Betrayal. So I hope Bush isn't too surprised when the people on the ground don't trust us any more now than they did then. And they talk about winning the war on terrorism. How do you win a war on terrorism against an invisible enemy that's all over the globe at this point, and we don't even know who they are? What would victory be, anyway? Israel has been fighting a war on terrorism since the day they became independent. Have they won? I think it's gotten worse. British government in Northern Ireland has been fighting a war on terrorism since the mid-60s. Have they won yet? I don't think so. If bombing and killing civilians is such a great deterrent to terrorism, why hasn't terrorism stopped yet? You tell me. I find myself agreeing with Michael Medved, of all people, when he wrote in the USA Today, the American people must pursue prevention and protection, not punishment. You know, I agree that we have a legitimate right to defend ourselves against an enemy that will not negotiate because they want us dead. Period. We have a right to defend ourselves. So let's think a little more about defense instead of offense, starting with not only ending our dependence on foreign oil and thus the need to oppress other countries over there in order to get it, but as much as humanly possible, end our dependence on oil altogether. In other words, fight terrorism by getting rid of the SUV. Prevent terrorism through putting, instead of wasting money on an endless war, putting nukes in outer space that don't work in the first place, how about putting that money into safer airports and safer planes? Follow the example of El Al Airlines in Israel, the #1 target for terrorism, and they haven't even had a hijacking since the late 60s. Why? Granted, you get grilled like crazy trying to get on the plane, but it's better than getting killed. And they also have a decompression chamber on the ground to simulate high altitude, so any altitude-triggered bombs go off where nobody's going to get killed. And they have not one but 2 bulletproof doors protecting the pilots, and even reinforce the floors of a plane, so if a bomb actually does go off, it won't necessarily down the aircraft. What do we do over here? Look at how people's heads are in the same corporate sand still. Still, the Bush administration and a good chunk of Congress are opposing putting up the money to have properly trained and well-paid inspectors at our airports. Instead, we privatize. And like privatization of public transit or schools or prisons or whatever else, the companies are not interested in providing the best service possible. They're interested in making the most money possible. Quality of service and protection of people from terrorism be damned. Example. In San Francisco, the people with the critical job of manning those metal detectors and inspecting carry-on luggage are the lowest paid people in the entire airport. That's privatization for you. Turnover is estimated to vary between 110 and 140% a year at those jobs. That is not going to protect us. Another idea that ironically was inspired in my mind by a full-page ad in the USA Today special pull-out travel section the day of September 11th. Full-page ad from the Hitachi Corporation about their bullet trains, or at least they made the semiconductors that power those Japanese bullet trains, the high-speed trains. And I thought, well, I'm not that interested in semiconductors, but I sure do like those trains. I mean, imagine a rail system that people would actually use in this country that could get you places like Minneapolis to Chicago, and you didn't have to fly anymore or burn up all that gas driving there. Sure, you can hijack a train too, but you can't fly it into New York City. Besides, trains are cool. And now to continue the sky is falling paranoia to keep the American people bullied and afraid, we've got these corporate media reports quoting federal sources saying we're really scared Osama bin Werewolf and his barnyard friends are going to blow up our nuclear power plants. Great way to protect those. Shut them down. You might have to give up the blow dryer, but is that really so bad? And believe it or not, as unreasonable a fundamentalist fanatic as Osama bin Laden is, 2 out of his 3 key demands are very reasonable, and if it will stop this violence, we should take them seriously. Number 1, American troops out of Saudi Arabia. Is that too much to ask? Number 2, end of these barbaric sanctions against the Iraqi people. Time and Newsweek magazine, the same week, both run cover stories. Why do they hate us so much over there? Why are they so anti-God, Mom, and apple pie? Well, think of this. 5,000 die in the World Trade Center bombings. The death toll of Iraqi civilians, most of them, from the Gulf War and those sanctions cutting off food and essential medicines, is now estimated to be between 1.5 to 2 billion people. Maybe we should end the sanctions and join the civilized world. And the third key demand of bin Laden is the destruction of Israel. That's not so reasonable. But we could be doing a hell of a lot more to rein in the excesses of Israel's own Saddam Hussein by the name of Ariel Sharon to get him to rejoin the civilized world and the human race. And people say, oh, Sharon's out of control. There's nothing we can do. Yes, there is. Cut off the military aid and call the ambassador home until Sharon wises up. Israel has a right to exist, but not to be so totally nuts on their neighbors. Thank you very much. And speaking of these tinderboxes in the former Soviet republics and other places, part of the reason things are so violent over there is because there's so many leftover weapons from when the Soviet communists were in charge. A lot of them, because people are so desperately broke, are being openly sold on the open market in arms bazaars in places like the town whose name I'm spacing on right now, right outside of Peshawar in Pakistan, right near the Afghan border. It's like going to the flea market instead of looking for weird records or kooky clothes or a lamp. Hey, you want some Stinger missiles? They've got them over here. How about some Kalashnikovs? Oh, go to this guy. He's got them this week. Oh, you want some grenades? Hey, they're cheaper than sugar in Somalia. Why not? Why don't we go over to these places and spend our giant defense budget buying up all these weapons and destroying them on sight? And for that matter, wouldn't it go a long way towards preventing future acts of terrorist violence if we start working on disarming the whole world instead of being in this horse race to see who can sell the most guns to the most dictators, then sell them to the opponents, and when they shoot each other, sell both sides some more? Look what we've done to Africa. Look what we've done to Africa. And for that matter, we didn't really finish the job and help the Russian people or the Ukrainians or the Uzbekistanis or anybody else after we destroyed the Soviet Union in the Cold War. We just left them to starve too. And long term, where's that going to get us? Well, we did the same thing to the Germans after World War I. Instead of aiding the German people, we rubbed their nose in the ruins of their own country till they became so desperately poor they democratically elected Hitler to power. After World War II, we were a little smarter. There was the Marshall Plan to rebuild and revitalize both Germany and Japan so that there wouldn't be another Hitler coming to power. It's not too late to do the same for the former Soviet Union. It may pay off in a big way in preventing mass carnage down the road. And, to quote the filmmaker Michael Moore, the Awful Truth fame, will we ever get to the point that we realize we will be more secure when the rest of the world isn't living in poverty so we can have nice running shoes? If it isn't obvious by now, back-breaking poverty is a prime recruiting ground for radical movements for change. And violent, strong-armed put-downs of movements for change creates the desperation and rage that creates terrorists. And so, don't believe the hype. We are patriotic citizens too. Patriotism means love of country, caring about its people and the way it relates to the rest of the world, caring about the long-term effects and consequences instead of short-term gain, caring about its environment. Patriotism does not mean giving blind loyalty and a blank check to people like George W. Bush. Therefore, it is nothing less than our patriotic duty to guard this country, which deep down I think we all love, against people who hide behind the flag and paranoia and God bless America uber alles and use the war on terrorism to terrorize the rest of us. Bullying the first neighbor on the block who takes their flag down, that ain't patriotism. Censoring Bill Maher and radio talk show hosts like Peter Werby, that's not terrorism. Secret Service closing down the Rage Against the Machine website, that's not patriotism. Clear Channel Communications not only banning Dust in the Wind by Kansas, but New York, New York by Frank Sinatra. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. Everybody, people now smile on your brother. Everybody get together, try and love one another by the Young Bloods. They've even banned those songs too. At least they're banning some Elton John songs. I've gotten rather sick of him personally. That's not patriotism, is it? Nor is these homegrown terrorists that don't seem to disturb John Ashcroft. They're called the Army of God. Heard of them? They've sent over 120 white powder-filled envelopes to abortion and family planning clinics. That ain't patriotism. That is terrorism. For some reason, they don't make Ashcroft's list. I don't know. Maybe he's one of these family values, part of the family values mob who believes that an unborn child's life is sacred, but as soon as they're born, to hell with them. Cut off their benefits, don't pay to educate them, and then put them in jail. In the long run, we must not let the fights against globalization and for a better environment and human and animal rights, against the death penalty, against the drug war, they should not be allowed to be a casualty of the war on terrorism. Fighting globalization and corporate power and abuse, such as the anti-WTO protests in Seattle and beyond, that in effect is fighting terrorism because we, not our government, care enough to address the root causes of terrorism in the first place. When corporations make people poorer and poorer and poorer, those other countries while plundering their natural resources and giving them nothing in return, they take that out not on corporations through terrorist violence, but on us. And that's not fair. And on top of that, oh, let me read you this thing too. I can't remember, so I'm going to read it to you. Fighting global warming and runaway pollution is also a national security issue, if you ask me. What good is an armed fortress against terrorism if we can't breathe or go outside? We are already far more likely to die from melanoma or internal pollution-induced cancers than we are to die from attacks by terrorists. We will not live as long as our parents at the rate we're going. No way. And what about all the refugees from global warming-induced climate disasters? What a great way to stoke the fire for more unrest, uproar, and of course, terrorists. Even if Bush and company would rather fiddle while the whole world burns, we can't. We can't afford to. So the goal must be to shorten the war on terrorism, the way we were so successful at shortening the Gulf War. There were so many mass protests all over the world against the Gulf War that King George I cut that war off quick and denied General Norman Schwarzkopf his desire to go beyond the Kuwait-Iraqi border and do a General Sherman job on Baghdad and Basra. And the reason for that was the protests. Not just in this country, but remember he had an alliance there too. And even if people like Margaret Thatcher or Helmut Kohl in Germany were willing to look the other way if Schwarzkopf went crazy, they knew their own people wouldn't. So George Bush I had to keep his promise and end the Gulf War, and I think it was due to protesters. Now, we're in the same position as those few lonely voices in the wilderness were in the early days when we were going into Vietnam, saying that war is unpatriotic, it's wrong, we should bring our troops home. And they were shouted down as communists, faggots, pinkos, traitors. But in the long run, against incredible odds, the whole military-industrial complex and both the Republican and Democratic Party hierarchy aiming at us with both barrels, the American people stopped the Vietnam War. We've done it before, we can do it again. And that is the same energy to save our very lives and ecosystem and quality of life. We must use long-term to turn the tide against corporate feudalism as well. And the way to get through to people about this, don't put people down for waving flags. People are upset and they're frightened. Let them express their feelings. But the way to get through to people about this is, from a pure military strategy objective, the war on terrorism ain't gonna work. All we're gonna do is create more Osama bin Ladens until we get smart and get more defensive instead of offensive, because for crying out loud, King George, now is not the time to play cowboy. And we gotta show them that. Thanks.
All right, Jello Biafra.